Alright, the results of the poll are in, and today we're going to be looking at Grenzo Havoc Razor. Actually, more people than I expected took part in the poll, so that's cool. It's nice to see, audience interaction, so thanks everyone who voted in that. In this Grenzo deck, I alluded to it in my Krenko deck tech. I was saying that I wanted to kind of retool the Krenko deck, switch out the commander for Grenzo, because I didn't really like how the Krenko deck played. So that's what I've done here. It is still a Goblin tribal deck, though. It plays a little bit differently. So Grenzo, it's a 2-mana commander. It's a 2/2 Goblin. The abilities are, whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a player, choose one. Goad target creature that player controls, or exile the top card of that player's library, and until end of turn you can cast that card and spend mana as though it were any color to cast it. So mainly we're playing this for the second ability. The idea is to basically make a Goblin tribal deck. Goblin tribal typically goes with making a whole bunch of little creatures, little 1/1 goblins. So you want to overwhelm your opponent and just hit them a bunch of times with your little creatures to get a bunch of triggers for the second ability so that you can start playing all of your opponent's cards. However, the first ability is relevant too, and in the time that I've played this deck, I have actually chosen the first ability over the second one sometimes. So, it's good to be able to goad an opponent's creature kind of whenever you want. If you're not familiar with what goad is, it's the creature that you target has to attack next turn, and it has to attack someone other than you if able. So with this being a Goblins deck, we're going to have a fairly low curve. There's lots of, 1/2 mana goblins that are pretty great. Starting off, we've got this Legion Loyalist. Pretty nice effect for Commander, actually. 1/1 haste is somewhat relevant, but the good thing is with the Battalion ability, what it does is whenever it attacks with at least 2 other creatures you control gain first strike, trample until end of turn, and can't be blocked by creature tokens. The can't be blocked by creature tokens is very relevant, I think, because, a lot of decks make creature tokens just kind of incidentally. And since you want to be hitting your opponents, this can let your creatures get through, and giving them trample is pretty big too. I like this guy a lot. I played this in Modern, actually, when I first got into Modern. Pretty good Goblin for Goblin Tribal. This is kind of a similar type of idea. It's just a 1/1 haste that's hard to block. You give it, you can pay 1 mana, and it can't be blocked except by creatures with Defender. So that's kind of a way to pretty much guarantee you're going to get in with at least one creature to trigger Grenzo. One thing I should point out for Grenzo is that with this second ability, it says you can cast cards, not you can play them, so you can't play lands with this ability. Just something to keep in mind. Got this Goblin Bushwhacker. It's a pretty great goblin. Gives all your goblins +1/+0 and haste until end of turn. You can play the kicker cost. Usually you want to pay the kicker cost. I mean, otherwise it's just a 1/1 for 1, but it's a pretty good ability actually if for just 2 mana. This is a pretty good one too, Goblin Chirurgeon. I believe that's how you pronounce it. Anyway, it's it's an old card. You can see an 0/2 for just 1, but you can pay 0, so paid nothing. Sacrifice a goblin to regenerate a creature. Quite relevant actually. With the 0, you're not really going to be triggering Grenzo's ability unless you have a Goblin Lord in play. But Grenzo can sort of be a lightning rod. Definitely a lot less than Krenko is. I like that about this deck, because with the Krenko deck, everyone wants to kill it as soon as it comes into play. Not so much with Grenzo, but if they do try to kill it, you can use this to regenerate it. You can regenerate any creature, notably. It doesn't have to be a goblin, but you have to sacrifice a goblin. Got a Goblin Lackey, very classic goblin card. When it hits your opponent, you can put a goblin from your hand into play. There aren't a lot of really big goblins. Well, there are some, but there aren't a lot of really big good ones, I should say. So with this one, chances are you're going to end up putting like a 1 or 2 drop into play. If you're lucky, maybe you can put like a Siege Gang Commander or something. But despite that, this is still a very good effect to have on a 1-drop, so we're definitely going to play it in this deck. There's a Goblin Motivator. This guy can give any creatures haste. Just tap, give something haste until end of turn. Not so bad for 1 mana. Goblin Welder, you can do lots of shenanigans with artifacts. It's kind of just in here, like, I'm not really playing it so much for artifact synergies or anything, but this is a good effect to have on a 1-drop goblin, even just to mess around with your opponent's artifacts. Later in the game, they might have an artifact in their graveyard and one in play, and you can just tap this to swap those out, basically. That could be pretty good for you, depending on what they have. Skirk Prospector, my pick for probably one of the best goblins ever. So, you know, 1-1 for 1, but you can just sacrifice a goblin to add a red to your mana pool. So in the Krenko version of this deck, this was one of the key pieces in order to be able to combo off. This isn't really a combo deck anymore, but it's still definitely a really good goblin to have. With Grenzo, a lot of time you're pretty mana hungry because, you know, if you say you have like 3 or 4 goblins out, you hit your opponent, you're gonna be able to cast 3 or 4 of their cards, right? But you still need mana in order to play it. So with this guy, this can give you the mana you need to play extra spells, have a really big turn. This one is not a goblin, but it's a pretty great card, especially in a deck like this where you want a low curve and you want to hit your opponent. So Ragavan is kind of perfect for that. You could actually kind of swap Ragavan and Grenzo out. This could be a secondary commander for this deck. This does nothing to do with goblins, but it would still be a great commander otherwise, just for being able to play this on turn 1. But yeah, Ragavan is pretty awesome, as many people probably know by now, I guess. You know, it's great to just start ramping you on turn 2, I guess, when you can start attacking. Got a Wily Goblin. I've always liked this guy. It's just a 1-1 for 2, but when it comes into play, you get a treasure. Just nice and simple. It gives you a body and some ramp just for 2 mana. That seems good. This is a way better version of it. Dockside Extortionist. Kind of disappointed that I only have one of this card, so I would have to share it between decks, but this is the deck that I've chosen to put it in because it's a goblin, so I feel like I should go in the goblin deck, but yeah, definitely playing this card. Sparksmith, this one is cool. This is one that I kept in from the Krenko version of the deck, but it's a pretty unique ability. I think you can tap it and deal X damage to a creature and X damage to you, whereas the X is the number of goblins you have in play. But since this is a go wide goblins deck, that kind of reads tap, destroy target creature. But since we're a red deck, we don't really have any life gain, so you just, if you're going to be using this, just keep in mind your life total, because yeah, this is repeatable removal, but it could potentially hurt you if you have a lot of goblins in play. Mog War Marshal, basically 3 bodies on 1 creature. Makes a goblin token when it comes into play, and when it leaves play, but it has Echo. Usually I don't pay the Echo cost. Well, actually, I played this in Modern also, and in that deck, I usually did not pay the Echo cost, but in the Commander deck that this is in, I could see myself paying the Echo cost, actually, because with this, it's also good sacrifice fodder, because if you have 2 extra mana, you can just pay that and keep this in play, and then there are cards where you want to sack creatures to do things, so this could be used for that. Just, you know, a lot of value for 2 mana. Very similar here, Goblin Instigator. It's just 2 goblins for 2 mana. Conspicuous Snoop, fairly new goblin. Lets us play cards from the top of our library. Well, goblins, I suppose. And, you know, it's just some nice card advantage for just 2 mana on a 2-2. Nice card to have. Here's one that's not a goblin, Loyal Apprentice. I like this card a lot. It's pretty cool. It's, for just 2 mana, it has haste on a 2-1. That's pretty good already if we want to be attacking. But also this gives us a creature potentially every turn. So at the beginning of combat on our turn, if we control our commander, we make a 1-1 Thopter creature that has flying. So, you know, this is 2-1 with haste for 2 that makes an evasive attacker every turn. I'm surprised this card doesn't see more play than it does. I feel like this could go in a lot of decks, and in this one it seems pretty great to me. For the creatures that are not goblins in this deck, I feel like they have to be quite good, seeing as it is a goblin tribal deck. So far we've got, I think there's just the 2. There's this one and the Ragavan. I think there's a couple more at least, though. There are several goblin lords, all at 3 mana. We've got Goblin Chieftain, Goblin King, Goblin Warchief, and Hobgoblin Bandit Lord. They're all very similar. These 3 give our goblins +1/+1. This one doesn't. However, this one is potentially the best one, actually, because it discounts our goblin by 1 mana. So that can be pretty big if we're, especially if we're playing multiple spells on a turn. These 2 give our goblins haste, which is also quite good. This one gives them mountain walk, and this one is kind of similar to Sparksmith in that it's repeatable removal on a creature. We can pay red and tap this to have Hobgoblin Bandit Lord deal damage equal to the number of goblins that enter the battlefield this turn to any target. That's pretty cool, though. So it's any target, not just any creature. So you could potentially, you know, kill your opponent with this, right? Pretty cool card. Those are the 3-mana lords. There's also one 4-mana lord, and potentially I'm forgetting another, but there's at least one more Goblin Lord creature. Got this Treasure Nabber. It's a pretty cool one. We can, steal our opponent's treasure, or well, opponent's treasures. Steal our opponent's artifacts for a turn. If they tap an artifact for mana, we get it until the end of the next turn. Definitely good when people are playing lots of mana rocks. Here's a patch full of commands. Not exactly a Goblin Lord. It kind of is. Come on, focus camera. Please focus. Okay. So it doesn't give our goblins any kind of boost, but it does have the ability whenever this or another goblin we control dies, this deals 1 damage to any target. This is a really good card just to have in play, just kind of sitting there, because it's sort of like Wrath protection, because if you have a bunch of goblins in play and someone plays a Wrath, you're going to get to be able to do a bunch of damage on the way out. Also, though, it has this other ability. You can pay 4 mana, 3 in a red, sack a goblin to make 2 goblins. So that could potentially be good with the Mog War Marshal that I was talking about. And this comes into play, make a goblin, sack it, make 2 more goblins. When it leaves play, you make a goblin, so you end up with 4 goblin tokens. Here's the new Krenko, I guess. A couple of years old at this point, but I feel like this card is really good. I don't think it's as good as the first Krenko, though, but we're definitely playing it. It's kind of like another one of the Army in a Can type of cards. Whenever it attacks, you put a 1/1 counter on it, and then you make a number of 1/1 goblin tokens equal to its power. So, it just gets bigger every time it attacks. It provides kind of inevitability. Lots of goblins. Definitely a cool card. I've already had some fun playing this one. I haven't played this version of the deck a lot, but in the time that I have played it, I got to play Krenko and do some cool stuff with it. Goblin Sharpshooter, a very popular goblin for not goblin decks, I suppose, for like combo decks, and I think it's a big one in Prosh. 3 mana for a 1/1, crappy stats. However, and also it doesn't untap during your untap step, but whenever a creature dies, you untap this, and you can do tap it to do damage to a creature or player. I think that's probably any target. I don't know how it's being errated, but yeah, this is a good way to ping down lots of stuff, or if you can combo out with it, you can just, this can be your win condition depending on how you make your combo. I've got a Goblin Matron in here. This one I actually had cut from the deck briefly while I was changing it from the Krenko deck to this Grenzo one, because I really didn't want to make this combo oriented, but I think this card is worth including anyway, even if you're not going for combos, because for 3 mana it is a 1/1 Goblin body, which is relevant, and it lets you search up any other goblin and put it into your hand. So even just going for like a value plan, I feel like that's still worth playing. So I got the Goblin Matron in here. Here's another one that's not a goblin, but I think it's pretty good. Like, I've always liked this card. I've tried to play it in many different decks in multiple formats as well. But Captain Lannery Storm, 3 mana, 2/2 with haste. The good thing though is whenever it attacks, you make a treasure. So what I see this as is like repeatable ramp, basically, because you're going to play it and attack the turn it comes into play. Chances are, if you have it on turn 3, at least one opponent should be open, so it ramps you on turn 3. But then if it survives, it can start ramping you again. And, it also has the ability, it gets +1/+0 whenever you sack a treasure, which is probably not super relevant in this deck, but it does matter. So I feel like this card is worth including. Like, it doesn't really fit in the Goblin theme, but viewing it as a repeatable source of ramp and, a cheap creature that has haste and can attack it and trigger Grenzo, I think it's probably worth including. So we're getting up to the bigger goblins now. Like I said, there's not that many that are very good, but there are definitely a few here that are quite nice to have in this deck. So Beetleback Chief is one of them. This is another Army in a Can card. It's just a 2/2 for 4, but when it comes into play, you make 2 goblin tokens. So you get 3 goblins for 1 card, which is nice. Here's one of the other Goblin Lords, Goblin Trashmaster. This one is really cool. It gives your goblins +1/+1. However, the really good ability is you can sack a goblin to destroy an artifact. And I'm sure you know how relevant artifacts are in Commander, so I feel like this card is pretty awesome to have in any Goblin tribal deck in Commander. Here's the original Krenko. Not the Commander anymore, but definitely still in the deck because it's an amazing card. And I feel like having this not as the commander, I might actually be able to tap it to get to use its ability more often in this deck than I would having it as the commander, because when it's the commander, people see it coming and they're going to play their turns around, not letting you get to use Krenko as soon as you play it. But if it's just sitting in your hand, it might actually work out better, so I'm interested to see how that could work out. But yeah, we're definitely still playing Krenko in a Goblin Tribal deck. Lightning Crafter, I did keep in this combo. It's just a nice way to end the game, right? Because sometimes games can go really long and grindy, and they do have to end at some point, right? So this combos with a sack outlet and Kiki-Jiki. I'll point that out when I get to Kiki-Jiki. But this gives us an infinite combo, and the only card that we need to add into the deck is this, because we will be playing Kiki-Jiki anyway, as well as any number of sack outlets, so I feel like definitely this card should be in the deck. Here's another non-goblin, but this card is really good. Treasonous Ogre from Conspiracy, the original Conspiracy. For 4 mana, it's a 2/3. Has Dethrone. We don't care about that, though. What we care about is the second ability. Pay 3 life, add red to your mana pool. Well, since in Commander you start with 40 life, you have some life to spend, so this, for 4 mana, this can ramp you by a lot. And this, in the Krenko deck, this was one of the cards that you would use to just kind of go off in one turn. You could do that in this deck too. It's in here more as kind of like a value card, but definitely worth including, I think, where we might have a turn where we exile some really good stuff with Grenzo, and we want to be able to play our opponent's cards. Treasonous Ogre can let us just pay some life to be able to do that. Got Perforos in here, another one that's kind of a leftover from the Krenko deck. But since we're still playing Goblin Tribal, we're still, playing a mono red deck. That puts a whole bunch of creatures into play. Perforos still works pretty great with that. And it's just a great way it's another great way to end the game. And what I like about this one is that it hits all of your opponents at once. So you don't have to, make anyone a target. You can just potentially, straight up win, not just take one person out of the game. Here's a cool one, Skirk Fire Marshal. This one, I've had this card for a long time, and when I was playing the Krenko deck, this is the one that I had cut from it for quite a while, and it was just sitting in my binder. But then when I was putting this deck together, I looked at it again and kind of reevaluated it, and I actually like this card a lot now. I feel like I should have been playing it the whole time, but anyway, it's a 5 mana 2/2, protection from red, kind of weird to be on a red creature. However, tap 5 untap goblins you control. This deals 10 damage to each creature and each player. That's pretty easy to be able to do. Having 5 goblins shouldn't be a problem for us. And it's just kind of like a wrath that we can threaten at any time. Like, we just put this in play, let it sit there. If we have 5 goblins, this is one of them, so we only need 4 others. We just have a wrath that we can use at any time. And also, keep in mind this deals 10 damage to each player, including you as well. But that can potentially be a way to end the game also, right? It's not out of the realm of possibility to have 15 goblins in play, especially if we've got a couple of turns with one of the Krenkos. So that could potentially just end the game right there, just use its ability 3 times. You would have to put it on the stack, right? Because if you let one resolve, it's going to kill all your creatures, but you can just put them all on the stack and let them resolve. But yeah, I think this card is really cool. I'm looking forward to playing this some more. Here we've got a very classic Goblin, Siege Gang Commander. This is kind of like the original Armenia Can for Goblins, I think. It's a bigger version of Beetleback Chief. This gives us 3 Goblins. 3 tokens plus this, so 4 Goblins on 1 card. You can also use the other ability to do 2 damage to something by sacking a Goblin. Always a nice card to have in a Goblin's deck. So here's the Kiki-Jiki. This also is a card that appears in many non-Goblins decks because it's a very combo-centric card. But the idea with this is it's good just to have as a value card in this deck too, because we can tap it to make a copy of one of our Goblins. Could be very useful, right? But the combo is with Lightning Crafter and a sack outlet. We'll just go with Skirk Prospector. That's the classic Goblin sack outlet. So you have either one of these in play, right? Make some room here. Say you have Lightning Crafter and Skirk Prospector. You go play Kiki-Jiki. it has haste, so you would tap it, make a copy of Lightning Crafter. Lightning Crafter, it champions a goblin when it comes into play, so you have to exile a goblin, and then when this leaves play, that goblin comes back into play. So you make a copy of Lightning Crafter, let's say this is the copy. Copy comes into play, you champion the Kiki-Jiki. The tokens that Kiki-Jiki makes have haste, so you use this tap ability to tap, do 3 damage to a player, then you use Skirk Prospector, sacrifice the token, Kiki-Jiki comes back into play, you can use its ability again, and just rinse and repeat this, so you use its ability, make a copy of Lightning Crafter, champion this, tap, do 3 damage, sack it, and there you go, there's your infinite combo. So that's a way to win to end the game, I guess. Well, I guess, yeah, if you end the game, that way you're winning, but it's a way to end the game. But I feel like it's important to have a way to end some grindy games, right? So I'm including at least this combo. Here's the biggest goblin we have in the deck, Muxus. Also, maybe the newest one? No, I guess this is probably the newest one. Muxus, though, it was super popular and annoying to play against in Magic Arena Historic for quite a while. Maybe not so much anymore, but this one, if you're not familiar with what it does, when it comes into play, you reveal the top 6 cards of your library, put all goblin creature cards with CMC 5 or less from among those onto the battlefield. The rest go on the bottom of your deck. So chances are we'll be able to get at least a couple of goblins, hopefully. In a 100-card deck, it's gonna probably not be as good as it is in Historic and just 60-card decks. But still, I feel like we'll more often than not get at least a couple goblins. Then also, whenever it attacks, it gets +1/+1 till end of turn for each other goblin we control, so it can get really big, right? This is one that's probably the best card that you could put into play if you are lucky enough to get a turn 1... Where is he? Goblin Lackey. So you go turn 1 Goblin Lackey, turn 2, hit someone, put this into play. Seems pretty good to me. I've made a mess with my goblins here. Alright. This one, another leftover from the Krenko deck, but it's pretty cool. This is, I think, yeah, this is the most expensive creature we've got at 7 mana. Chancellor of the Forge. 5/5. However, we can reveal this from our opening hand at the beginning of the game, or the beginning of the first upkeep, and if we do, we put a 1/1 goblin into play with haste, so we basically get to start the game with a 1/1 hasty goblin in play already, which is, like, doesn't seem like much, but that can snowball, right? Especially if you've got Grenzo, so it's a pretty big advantage to have early on. Also, though, this is a very good card to have late, because when it enters the battlefield, you can put X 1/1 red goblin creature tokens with haste onto the battlefield, where X is the number of creatures you control. So, you know, this is a go wide little creature swarm your opponent deck, so if we're late game, chances are we'll have probably quite a few little 1/1 tokens, and this is just going to double that when this comes into play. So that's all of the creatures. There are quite a lot of them in this deck, but there's a couple cards here that they're not creatures, but they're kind of like creatures, because both Krenko's Command and Dragon Fodder, they're 2-mana sorceries that do the same thing. It's just put 2 1/1 goblin tokens into play. So, you know, 2 goblins for 1 card for 2 mana. Definitely playing both of those. Here's a little bit bigger version. Hordling Outburst gives us 3 goblins for 3 mana. Here's some more cards, some instant sorceries that don't give us goblins, though. So this one, basically a red staple in EDH at this point. I think one of the best red cards you can play, probably. Jessica's Will. It's just gives you so much ramp for 3 mana. Like, a lot of the times this is pay 3 mana, add 7 mana, and then you can get some card advantage with the second ability too. This is a super good card, right? Vandalblast, some nice artifact destruction. Got a Blasphemous Act for nice and cheap Wrath. A lot of the time it's just 1 red mana for a Wrath, basically do 3 damage to everything. Here are a couple of cards that at first glance I was thinking of cutting these, but then I thought about it some more and I'm like, yeah, actually these work really well in this deck, so definitely want both of these cards. Both Battle Hymn and Brightstone Ritual. They're very similar. So Brightstone Ritual is just 1 red mana instant. Add red to your mana pool for each goblin you have. Battle Hymn is 2 mana at instant. Add red to your mana pool for each creature you have. So this is only for goblins, this is for all your creatures. But What you need these for is because with Grenzo, like I said before, you're going to be hitting your opponent with lots of creatures and exiling lots of cards from the top of their library. You can spend mana as though it were mana of any color, but you still need the mana, right? So that's what these cards are for. Say you hit your opponent with like 4 or 5 creatures, that's going to be a lot of cards that you're going to be able to cast, but you might not have the mana to cast it. But if you play this, this will ramp you a lot at instant speed, and you can cast those cards they exile with Grenzo. Got a little bit more removal here in Chaos Warp, just removal for anything. Goblin Bombardment, another Goblin card that often appears in non-Goblin decks, but we can sack a creature to do 1 damage to any target, I believe. Got a Blood Moon. Since we're playing a mono-red commander deck, this can be a good way to not end the game, but it can just kind of lock your opponents out. So, a very powerful card to have. Let me move some of these other cards around here. Let's go like this. Here's another enchantment you can see. Experimental Frenzy. I loved playing this card in Standard. You can go kind of nuts with this if you can get lucky enough to be able to keep playing cards off the top of your deck, and if you have enough mana to play them. But if you're not familiar with what it does, you can look at the top card of your library anytime. You can play the top card of your library. However, you cannot play lands. You can't play cards from your hand. So, it locks out your hand. So you can just keep playing things off the top of your deck, but you got to keep in mind that you're still only allowed 1 land drop per turn, right? So if you've played a land from the top of your deck already, then you see another land, you can't, you kind of stop there. But as long as you can keep playing stuff and, not hit too many lands, you can just churn right through your deck, right? You can also pay 4 mana and destroy this. So if you have stuff in your hand that you do want to play, you can just sacrifice this, basically. We'll destroy it. Then your hand comes back online. Here's a card that'll provide us with a lot of mana in order to go off with Grenzo's ability or Experimental Frenzy. Mana Echoes. 4 mana enchantment. Whenever a creature comes into play, you may add colorless to your mana pool for each creature you control that shares a creature type with it. So, this can make so much mana, right? Since we're playing goblins, let's go with a very conservative play when we have this. Say we have 3 goblins in play, and then we play a 1-drop goblin. We add 3 mana for just playing this 1-drop. That's on the very low end of what this can do, but this can give you 10, 20 mana, right? If you're doing stuff with Krenko or Siege Gang Commander or something like that. It's a really powerful card to have in a deck like this. Here's a cool card, Dictate of the Twin Gods. 5 mana enchantment with flash. If a source would deal damage to a permanent or player, it deals double that damage instead. So keep in mind this works for your opponents too, but that's kind of why this has flash, right? The idea is that you play this at your opponent's end step, and then you get to take advantage of it first. This can kind of be a way to end the game. If you have enough, if you can deal enough damage to your opponent, you can set this up where you just play it on their end step and on your turn attack and win. Nice way to end the game. We have a fair amount of artifact in here since we're a mono-red deck. We don't really get access to land ramp like you would in a green deck. So we've got Mox Amber. I like playing this card in any commander deck that has a commander with mana cost 2 or less, or even a lot of times 3 or less. It just seems really easy to turn this on, but we're playing Mox Amber, Mana Crypt, Soul Ring, Arcane Signet. Those are, I guess, the mana rocks. But then there's also artifact ramp in the form of Ashnod's Altar here. Since we're making a lot of creatures, this can be sort of similar to Mana Echoes. Well, kind of. You have to think about it a different way, but we're using our creatures to make some mana. This adds 2 colorless mana for each creature that we sacrifice. Can kind of go off with Grenzo with that. Here's a popular card for many tribal decks, and we're playing a tribal deck, so we're playing this, Coat of Arms, and make our creatures nice and big. Can potentially also make your opponent's creatures big, so just keep that in mind. Kind of similar card here in Eldrazi Monument. It gives our creatures +1/+1, flying, and indestructible. Very good for a go wide deck. At the beginning of our upkeep, we have to sack a creature, and if we don't, we sack this. But it should be pretty easy to be able to keep this in play. Like, a lot of the cards will give us repeated goblins, like Grenzo or Pasholik Mons, or wait, that's correct, yeah, Krenko or Pasholik Mons, or other Krenko. Skull Clamp, awesome card, just basically to get card advantage. Sack our 1/1 goblins to draw 2 cards. I've got both Lightning Greaves and Swift Boots in here. Like I said before, Grenzo isn't so much of a lightning rod like Krenko, but it's still, I think, definitely worth having both of these cards. And we're still playing Krenko, right? So, Krenko is definitely a good creature to put these on. I've got a couple of swords in here. I'm a pretty big fan of playing swords in pretty much any commander deck that I can fit them in, but I've got both Sword of Hearth and Home and Sword of Light and Shadow. But I think they work pretty well in here because, we're a deck that wants to be attacking, so any number of our creatures could wear these swords well, even Grenzo itself. Hearth and Home is pretty nice. It allows us to get ramp every turn. That's the main reason we're playing this. The exile thing, the flicker effect, could be pretty good too with like a Siege Gang commander or something like that, though. Light and Shadow, I think, is pretty good in this deck, actually. The gain 3 life could actually matter since we're playing a mono red deck, so this is actually a way for us to gain some life. Could let us take some more advantage of something like Treasonous Ogre. But being able to return a creature from our graveyard to our hand, we're playing, lots of good creatures that we might want to return late in the game, so I feel like this is probably one of the better swords that we could be playing. So that's it for all of the non-land cards. There's a fair number of utility lands, though, so I'm going to talk about those. Stack these up here. So Mutavault, it's a land that can become a goblin for just 1 mana, so that can provide a lot of utility in some different situations, or, at the very simplest form, we can just pay a mana and attack with a 2/2, which is fine, right? It's pretty easy to be able to have, kind of a high number of colorless lands in this deck since it's monocolored. Nykthos, one of my favorite lands, can get lots of mana with this, especially since we're playing a monocolored deck. Typically this would go in a monocolored deck, but it can work quite well in 2-colored decks too. Cavern of Souls, since we're playing a tribal deck, we should be playing this, I imagine. There's something I'm going to point out about this card that I love showing to people. I traded for this a long time ago. I think at the time it was worth like less than $20, but I got this one for super cheap, and I'll show you why. On the back, someone has proxied a Vampire Nighthawk onto this Cavern of Souls. Just imagine how that happened. Either what I feel like probably happened was this card looks pretty similar to one of the common, like the bulk common lands, like I can't remember the name of it, but it's like it comes into play tapped and you add 1 mana, you pay 1 mana to add 1 mana of any color, something like that. I think that was in the same limited environment. So probably someone just thought it was that and then pulled it out of their bulk box, wrote Vampire Nighthawk, and they're like, oh crap, Cavern of Souls. But anyway, I just love showing people the Vampire Nighthawk on the back of this cavern. Got an Ancient Tomb, nice way to ramp here. And Weird Battlements. Not the most important card to have in the deck, but definitely it can be relevant. We can just pay a red and tap this to give a creature haste. So, like I said, I feel like it's pretty low cost to be able to include some colorless lands in this deck. And it's not a free inclusion, but it's pretty close to it. So I'm just playing this for, the off chance that it could be relevant, because we want to attack with our creatures, so this can give them haste and let us attack a turn sooner. The rest is just basic mountains, and I've upgraded this one from the Krenko deck. It's no longer just an assortment of random mountains. At least now they're all full art. However, there's still snow-covered and normal ones. And then there's also this random foil Odyssey land. I thought it was cool, so I left it in there. So that's the Grenzo deck. This still does play somewhat similar to the Krenko deck. Like, it kind of goes nuts really quickly, and, you know, it's still a Goblin tribal deck that wants to, like, crap out lots of little goblins and swarm your opponents and kind of go off. But so far, I like this deck a lot better just to have fun with while I'm playing, because, like, every game is going to be different, I think. Like, in the recent game that I played, I cast a Demonic Tutor with my mono red deck, which is something you would never be able to do, right? But in a deck like this, you get to do things like that. So I think it just makes things more interesting, more fun to play. Like, it's probably not as competitive as Krenko, but I think it's a more fun deck to play, and it kind of lets you play as a Goblin tribal deck rather than as a straight up combo deck. So I'm a fan of this deck. I'm looking forward to playing it some more. And there's a ton of goblins in Magic, right? So there's a lot of different options for cards that I could include in here. You could build this as not a Goblin tribal deck, right? Like, Grenzo itself isn't a Goblin tribal card, but I think that its ability works well in Goblin tribal because it's the thing that Grenzo wants is a go wide deck to hit your opponent with lots of creatures, and that's what goblins are. So, you know, there's fit together naturally, right? But you could build this in, you know, many different ways, I think. So if you play Grenzo and you play differently, I'd be interested to hear how you play it, or if you just have some kind of suggestions for other cards that you could think, could work well in here. I'd be happy to read that too. But you know, let me know what you think. Otherwise, though, if you're still watching, thanks for watching. It'd be cool if you can like and subscribe. And otherwise.